today is Nicola Simonetti, and the talk is on the philosophy of mind and neuroscience, and it's going to be on the case of mirror neurons toward a reductive theory of the mirror system.
Okay, first of all, excuse me for my bad spelling because I'm not used to speak English. First, a brief summary of my talk. My talk is divided into two parts. The first part I take into consideration mirror neuron discovery by the Parma team of Rizzolatti, Jacobone, Gallese, etc. in the 90s, and its fundamental interpretations and outcomes. While in the second part, I take into consideration the theory of mind of Ji-Won Kim that I find coherent with this discovery. One of the richest and most exciting books in reporting experiments and implications arising from neurons discovery is Mirrors in the Brain, How Our Mind Share Actions and Emotion, 2008, from the original one in Italian by Rizzolatti and Sinigaglia. The central argument around which the 7 chapters of the book are articulated is that the brain that acts is also and above all a brain that understands. The meaning and scope of this statement lie in the heart of the neural mechanism identified by the neurophysiologists at the University of Parma, headed by Rizzolatti. These researchers discovered in the premotor cortex of monkeys and humans the existence of 2 groups of neurons which are both active during the implementation of actions related to objects. They are simple, familiar gestures like grabbing something with your hand, bringing food to your mouth. The surprising thing is that these 2 groups of premotor neurons are also activated in the absence of any enforcement action during purely observation explicit tasks. The first group of neurons responds to a vision of the object to which the action could be directed, while those of the second group respond to the observation of another individual who performs the same action. From the authors, we may take the example of the coffee cup. The premotor neurons are activated while you grasp the handle, but for some of them activation is triggered even by the simple observation of the cup resting on the table. For others, also by the observation of our neighbor who grasps the cup to drink his coffee. Therefore, we have in both cases bimodal neurons that activate both for motor and perceptual processes. The neurons of the first group were called canonical neurons because since the 30s it has suggested the involvement of the premotor areas in the processing of visual information about an object and the motor areas required to interact with it. Those of the second group were called mirror neurons because they cause a mirror reaction in the neural system of the observer, in which takes place a simulation of the observed action. In the light of this mechanism of neural embodied simulation, it could be reinterpreted the role played by the motor system within the whole cognitive system, because the first was usually connected only with the planning and execution of actions. On the contrary, it seems that the bimodal neurons found in premotor cortex are strongly implicated in high-level cognitive processes, particularly in the perceptual recognition of objects and actions, and the understanding of their meaning. This new way of seeing and explaining the motor system undermines the rigid boundary between the perceptive cognitive processes and the motor ones. This rigid boundary between motor and cognitive processes has for years characterized the interpretation of the architecture of the brain. On the contrary, it seems that perception, understanding, and action are grouped together into unified mechanisms, according to which the brain that acts is also above all a brain that understands. Brain understanding regarding objects is related to their functional significance or affordance. Canonical neurons hold an immediate understanding of the possible interactions that some objects have for a perceiving subject. In the case of the handle of a coffee cup, the possibility to be grasped. Instead, mirror neurons enable an immediate understanding of the intentions of another individual, for example, the intention of a man to bring the cup to his mouth to drink the coffee, making possible a prediction of his future behavior. There are 2 experiments in Rizzolatti and Sinigallia's book which are considered very important to define the role of mirror neurons in our understanding of the purpose underlying the actions. Former has revealed the existence of the mechanism not only in motor and visual mode, but also in auditory mode. Indeed, when the monkey is in darkness and listens to the noise produced by an action as breaking a nut, the same neuron fires when the animal bursts the nut, when it sees someone breaking a nut, and when it hears the sound of someone who breaks it. The interpretation of this experiment is that whatever the mode, the same neuron fires to encode the abstract concept of breaking that coincides with the aim, the intention of the action. The second experiment has allowed to discriminate between a gesture of grabbing aimed to bring the food to the mouth or put it in a container. During the execution of that precise action, grasping, mirror neurons fired in different ways, depending on the ultimate goal of action. That is, if the intention was to bring food to the mouth or to move it into the container. Some results obtained with the humans by an experiment with fMRI seem to go in the same direction. It was noted a particularly significant activation of the mirror system in experimental subjects during the observation of actions which were not pure, but precisely included in the context, from which one could clearly infer the intention that was implied. All these experiences would allow us to state that the mirror neurons system is able to encode not only the act, but also the intention with which it is made. According with the paradigm of embodied cognition, thus by many philosophers and neurobiologists, namely Nicola, etc., the intention of others can be understood without any reflective, conceptual, or linguistic mediation, would be nothing but a pragmatic understanding, based solely on the motor knowledge on which it depends our own capacity to act. Two other important functions are assigned to the mirror system, are described in Rizzolattin-Sinigalla's book as basilar capacity, which would make verbal and non-verbal language possible. They are an imitative function intended as the ability to replicate gestures already belonging to our own motor repertoire. Second, the capacity to learn new motor patterns by imitation. It is a common function that would also outline a possible scenario for the origin of human language related to the evolution of the mirror system, which could be interpreted in this sense as an instrument of integration between gestures and sounds to foster a more precise understanding of social behaviors. Dulcis in Fundo, the last chapter of the book, is dedicated to the sharing of emotions. The central thesis is that the recognition of emotions of others is based on a set of different neural circuits which share the mirror properties already seen in the case of action understanding. It was possible to study experimentally some primary emotions, such as pain and disgust. The results clearly show that observing the other expression of sorrow or disgust activates the same neural substrate underlying the perception in first person of the same kind of emotion, as if it were a sort of involuntary perception motor imitation. Further confirmation comes from clinical trials in patients suffering from neurological diseases. Once lost the ability to feel and express a given emotion, it becomes impossible to recognize even when expressed by the others. As in the case of the actions, also for emotions, one can speak of an immediate pre-logic understanding that do not require cognitive processes of the kind of conceptual inference or association. This immediate understanding of emotions of others would be the necessary precondition for better empathic behavior underlying much of our inter-individual relations. Moreover, as the authors rightly note, already Darwin himself in the expression of emotions in Men and Animals, 1872, has emphasized the adaptive value of emotions and the evidence of the perception of emotional empathy in the animal kingdom. Far from being confined to the functioning of certain nerve cells, the mirror properties would pervade the entire system of the brain. The same logic that allows to pair execution and action, understanding in a single neural mechanism, allows us also to describe emotional sharing and perhaps even the arising of phenomenon of consciousness. In the second part of my talk, I try to show the theoretical concordance of this discovery with the reductive theory of mind, particularly with the supervenance reductive theory of mind claimed by Kim in 1993, 6, 8, and 2005. Indeed, it seems to me that the way in which the so-called neural system works is theoretically compatible with some crucial concepts and principles in the metaphysics of mind by Kim. Notably, they are, first, the concept of reductive psychophysical supervenience, according to which a mental property is realized by a species-specific physical neural property, making use of a functional model of reduction. Second, the preemption of a physical cause on a mental cause and the redundancy and unintelligibility of mental causation. Third, the principle of physical causal closure, according to which there are causes in a genuine sense always in the physical domain. Fourth, the multi-layered metaphysical model of the world, which distinguishes between ontological levels, micro-macro properties, and theoretical conceptual orders, physical, mental, social, etc. Even aside the long and complex history of this concept, starting from the last interpretation of Kim in Mind and Physical Work, in a reductive sense, it means that the physical-based property P is necessarily sufficient for the supervening mental property M, because supervening properties depend or are determined on by their subvening space-specific properties, and there's an ontological identity between them, being instantiated in the same time T. It seems to me that these distinct features of the concept of psychophysical supervenience are fully consistent in a theoretical way with the functioning of mirror neurons and mirror system, according to which perception and cognitive processes are realized on the same neural circuitry of motor processes, dependent on their way of working. By this way, a will or intention may be originally read as a motor disposition realized on its own neural circuitry. Hence, it's clear that the genuine causal action or causation takes place first at physical level, in the activation of the neural circuits that realize the motor and cognitive processes. By this way, as Kim himself says, mental causation comes to be redundant because physical causation is necessary and sufficient. Let's see the picture in which Kim distinguishes supervenience from physical causation and from mental supervenient causation. It's first the neural state, according to supervenience causation model, to cause on one side a certain neurophysiological event, a muscular contraction, on which wincing supervenes, while on the other to constitute the supervenience base of pain, which superveniently causes wincing. This model considers mental causal processes as necessarily dependent or supervenient on those at the physical temporal level, which is the only genuine causal level. The reason is that physical domain is causally closed. Indeed, there is no mental or non-physical cause for itself that is without a physical base of realization. Kim describes by these words his crucial principle of causal closure. If you pick any physical event and trace out its causal ancestry and posterity, that will never take you outside the physical domain. That is, no causal chain will ever cross the boundary between the physical and the non-physical. Finally, I consider Kim's distinction between levels, micro, macro, and orders, physical, mental, during the first chapter of Mind and Physical Work, very interesting and important from a logical and metaphysical point of view towards a reductive theory of mind. His starting point is that mental properties, or generally speaking, second-order properties, are realized on physical neural properties as their base of supervenience. This realization relation should make the multi-layered structures of level arising. But now, which is the relation between level hierarchy and order hierarchy? Kim stresses the fact that both second-order properties and their first-order realizers are properties of the same entities and systems, which means to say that the order hierarchy takes place on the same level, being first, second, and order properties nothing but properties of the very same object or system on a certain micro-macro level. So, making use of Kim's significant words, when we talk of second-order properties and their realizers, there's no movement downward or upward in the hierarchy of entities, and their properties ordered by the micro-macro relation. This distinction between order hierarchy and level hierarchy seems to be undoubtedly crucial toward a genuine causal efficacy to properties. On the contrary, spin, charm, and such are properties of elementary particles, and they have no application to atoms, molecules, and higher objects in the micro-macro hierarchy. Transparency and flammability are properties of aggregates of molecules, and they have no place for atoms or more basic particles. This idea, from a point of view, clearly leads to a reductive way of seeing every mental process, as it is shown by mirror system working. Vice versa, micro-macro level hierarchy does not concern properties of the same object, but different properties for different objects, depending on their complexity in micro-macro progression. The same way, consciousness and intentionality are properties of biological organisms, or at least neural systems, and they have no application to entities which are micro in relation to them. By this way, we might claim proper causal powers for emerging complex properties, such as cognitive faculties and consciousness in human beings, in spite of a reductive and functional explanation via realization. So, macro-properties in level hierarchy in a different way from second-order properties in order hierarchy can, in general, do have their own causal powers, which go beyond the causal powers of their macro constituents. Here it is the importance to me of the distinction between orders and levels, whose target is not only to make clear our language, but also to clarify which properties have proper causal powers and which ones have not. The mirror neurons discovery, since it shows a close neurophysiological link between motor processes and cognitive functions, as perception, vision, etc., first it confirms, in my opinion, the fact that our descripted orders for behavior, such as intentionality, will, etc., lie on the same physical level of the implementation of that behavior, often even before our awareness, as it is shown by Libet, 2004 experiments on consciousness and will. In conclusion, the discovery of mirror neurons, as well as giving an immediate biological foundation to the concept of empathy and related ideas, makes us understand, in my opinion, as well observed in the foreword to Rizzolatti and Sinigaglia, that the same rigid boundary between perceptual, cognitive, and motor processes ends up being largely artificial. Not only perception is immersed in the dynamics of the action, being more articulate and complex than previously thought, but the brain that acts is primarily a brain that understands. This is a pragmatic, preconceptual, and pre-linguistic understanding, but yet not less important, since it rests on the many of our much celebrated cognitive abilities. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, we have time for questions. Any time for questions and discussion? Yes.
Okay.
Richard?
Okay, so here's an argument against Rizzolati's view, and I've never known what to make of this, so I wonder if you can offer some insight. So he thinks that when the monkey sees the nut breaking and the mirror neurons fire, those mirror neurons are encoding the concept of breaking a nut, and that thinking about breaking a nut is supervenient on those processes. But here's another possibility. Somewhere downstream from that, the monkey tokens a concept, breaking the nut. And there are just associations that have been forged between thinking about breaking nuts and actually breaking nuts yourself. So it sends a there's an association between that concept and your motor system. So what happens is that you start to break a nut and then it's clamped down.
Yes.
Because I think this makes sense. Like when you think of thinking about turtles makes us walk slower. It's really kind of strange to think that. What's happening when we see a turtle is that we simulate the turtle so we go slower, and that is constitutive of having the concept of a turtle. And so something like that might be going on in the mirror system.
I think that about the macaque monkey, the idea of association is the problem that you are in front of an animal that perhaps is not able to have a so sophisticated mechanism to understand in an immediate way an action, something that it is happening around him. So I think that the idea of an activation on a neurophysiological level could be more plausible. Instead, the idea of association, I think that entails a high idea of psychology, and I respect the monkey, but perhaps association is too much higher function for a monk.
Yeah, I was thinking of something just more brutally causal, like, because the token, the construct gets token so often in association with this other one, it tends to like also mirror neurons also look at the same time. So I don't know if it's a high level concept.
It could be an interpretation, but I think that this experiment that shows that a same neuron fires when the animal breaks the nut, when it sees somewhere breaks the nut, and when it hears the sound, perhaps is the demonstration that there's before a physiological process, a basic process, before association. We could interpret association as something that comes after this event, or perhaps association is only a way of interpreting his behavior. So something like mind reading, I don't know, something like that. I think that we are not obliged to interpret it as an association in the first time. You may start from a neurophysiological event, and then you can interpret it also as an association, but you are not obliged to interpret it in a psychological way. In the sense that psychological, in the sense of a higher level science, but only as a deeper level, as something automatic at the basic level, sort of something like empathy, something automatic that is not conscious or not completely conscious. This is interpretation, of course, because we have only empirical data, but we must give an interpretation. Monkeys, and this is a very hard problem. Yes, because of course we can't be in the head of the monkey, and we can't see his thought. So it's just an interpretation.
Other questions?
We're
Ready?
being told that
Oh, we have to go.
food is
I see.
cold and we gotta go, so we continue
well-
Nicola's conversation down the hall. We can continue
That
this
sounds
session.
great. So there's dinner where we have lunch, and let's thank our speakers.
I was supposed to have a meeting with him.
Well, there you go, have it. I didn't even hear.